When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, no good deed. User, Tuffalt22. Posted, May 11th, 1997.
Last week, my girlfriend Lizzie and I had what I thought was the most pointless fight ever. We were on our way home from seeing the Bryan Jonestown massacre at Khyber and maybe 1 or 1:30 in the morning. This is something we do pretty regularly, leave shows in the city late at night, and to get back, we always take the Delaware Expressway as far as Cottman, then more or less ride it all the way back home. The night of the Jonestown show, we tried to take the usual route, but I-95 was completely shut down. A heavy-set cop manning the blockade said a transport truck had rolled over, causing a pileup. He also said they weren't likely to open it back up for hours, and our best bet for getting home was to go the other way, taking the other expressway across the river to MLK, then north till we came back over the Twin Bridges. Before we could pull a U-turn, the cop knocked on my window and motioned for me to roll it down, which I did. Yes, officer? You kids don't stop for anything while you're on the west side of the river, understand? We understand. He bent close, his hand on my door. Even if they look like they need help, in fact, especially if they look like they need help. The west side being dangerous wasn't exactly new, but I thought he must have assumed we were a couple of dumb small-town types who needed babying. I nodded in agreement. Yes, sir, absolutely. We just want to get home. He nodded, standing back up and knocking twice on the roof of the car. Glad to hear it. You kids have a good night. The cop's assessment of us as sheltered suburbanites picked at me, and I stayed quiet as we crossed the river. Lizzie finally sighed. What's eating you, Todd? You're sulky quiet. It's the worst kind. I stayed that way until we passed under a heavily graffitied overpass and the road opened back up. It annoys me that Officer Dump Truck thinks we're a couple of country bumpkins who don't know how the big bad city works. The blank look I got in return indicated I may have overinterpreted the situation. What are you talking about? It's West Philly. He was just doing his job. That's the other thing, I said, trying to find another way to make my annoyance his fault. It's West Philly. It's not a demilitarized zone. That's just racist is all. I could feel her eyes on me. Him telling us to be safe on a drive home we're not familiar with is racist. All the potential reasons to accuse a cop of racism, and this is the one you pick? I was losing badly. It just pissed me off is all. It's not like there aren't good people over here. Lizzie sighed again. No one is saying that, Todd. Good people aren't the ones he was warning us about. All you're saying is you're tired and you got worked up over nothing. I know, just let it go. We drove in silence for several more minutes, and I was stewing the whole time. You ever get something stuck in your craw and even though you know you're wrong, you just can't stop thinking about it? That's where I was as I watched an old freight train rumble along the elevated track to the left side of the road. A few minutes later, my headlights lit up a pullout ahead and the worn-out Ford Fiesta parked there. Not far ahead of it, I saw the back of a man trudging up the expressway, a gas can in his hand. He was facing forward, so all I could see was the back of him, brown hair, olive jacket, khaki pants. Suddenly, I had a cause. Someone on the west side needed help, and I was just the person to do that. I signaled a lane change and started slowing down. Lizzie had started to doze off in the passenger seat, but was woken up by the deceleration. "What are you doing?" "That guy's run out of gas. We're gonna give him a lift." She turned to look at me. "What the fuck are you talking about? What did the cops say? Especially don't stop if they're pretending to need help?" I felt a righteous thrill. Exactly, because he's an asshole, and I'm not going to do what an asshole tells me to do. This is a good person who needs help, and we're going to help him. Jesus, Todd, come on. You can't be serious. There's no gas stations around for miles. This has to be a scam. I snorted. A scammer just happened to be walking along the road at the same time as the one car passed by. If their timing is that good, they deserve to scam us. The car was starting to bounce along the bumpy asphalt at the side of MLK as we slowly pulled up behind the walking man. He gave no indication we were there, so I honked the horn. Lizzie stared daggers at me, but didn't say anything. I cranked my window down and called out, "Hey buddy, you need a hand?" The walking man ignored me and continued forward. That was odd. Maybe he was hard of hearing. I honked the horn once, twice, then a third time. Still no response. "Todd, this isn't right." Lizzie didn't sound exasperated anymore. She sounded scared. The man kept walking, the orange gas can swinging back and forth from his right hand. Lizzie was saying something else, but I was lost in thought, annoyed at being ignored. As ridiculous as it sounds now, I actually had the thought that somehow the cop had set this up. A sort of prank for people who had to take a detour because of the road closure. It was the final straw. I stomped hard on the brake and we lurched forward. Lizzie started hitting me. "Drive, Todd. Fucking go. It's not a person. Can't you see? It's not a person." What does she mean, not a person? I thought. He's right in front of... My inner monologue ended when I recognized that the man had stopped walking. Not only that, he had never turned around, yet he was now facing us. He was pale, crepe paper white, and his eyes were the red of missed stoplights at a busy highway intersection, the sort of thing you see before your life changes forever. Whatever we were looking at, it wasn't a man. Lightning fast, he was at Lizzie's locked door, pulling so hard on the steel handle it creaked. The sound he made was animal, a frustrated roar as he reared back with the gas can, ready to smash the window in. My indignant rage from earlier still hadn't subsided, so fear never had a chance to take root the way it might otherwise have. As unnecessary as it may have been, I think the anger saved us that night because instead of losing my cool, I jammed down on the gas. The tires spun and squealed, spitting bits of broken asphalt before biting down and propelling away up the road. The man's strike, which would have easily shattered Lizzie's window, came down on empty air and he let out another inhuman bellow. Moments later, and he had disappeared into the distance. Neither of us spoke. Gone though he may have been, it was almost like we could still feel him close, and knew saying anything might bring him back. I know it sounds crazy, but is it really crazier than anything else I've just said? Lizzie was the first to speak, just after we'd cleared the twin bridges and were back on our side of the Schuylkill. I can't feel it anymore, like it couldn't cross the water with us. I didn't say anything. It was shock, I think, or something close to it. There was no escaping the fact I'd nearly gotten us killed, though by who or what, I couldn't say. Lizzie looked over at me. She was shaking. "Roll up your window, baby. It's cold outside."
Subject, December Black. User, Coldco12. Posted, August 9th, 1998.
They come in December. It starts with a panic that has no discernible origin. You find yourself checking the locks more often, making sure the gas is off on the stove. Then the black-capped chickadees stop singing and the juncos. Once silence falls, you know for sure. And anyone who can afford to leave does. Second homes in Green Bay or hotel rooms in Milwaukee and Chicago. Anywhere but Potter, Wisconsin, where the shadows are deepening to an unnatural December black. Those who can't afford to leave or just won't live by the rules the same way our parents did. Never walk alone, live by daylight, don't stare into the trees. Should you, by some accident, glance into the forest and see a distorted skeletal face staring back at you, grinning slackly, do not react. Do not speak of Christmas in 1982 when Teller Gordon's son cried out to the man in the white. What exploded from the fresh powder is impossible to fully describe, but it was thin and fast. The sound it made like cracking knuckles. There wasn't enough left of the boy to bury. We thought they came for the bears, and so for generations, our people have hidden inside as outside the December black descended. Over countless nights, we listened to them hissing and buzzing through the woods, slaughtering whatever they found, naked branches vibrating amid a chorus of demented shrieks as flesh was ripped and rib cages burst. When the wind changed direction, heat pumps would fill the house with the scent of copper. We thought they came for the animals, but whenever the equinox came and the heaviest darkness would lift, a few more of us would be gone with it. The time before last, it was Sue Ward, Jim Tupper, and David Taft. Then, 6 years ago, it was Billy Reed and Kathy Taylor. We mourned them all, of course, but privately told ourselves that they must have failed somehow, broken the rules in a way we never would. Over time, a few have left town to start over somewhere else. For most of us, however, Potter is our home and our birthright, and we could no more imagine leaving it than we could living on the moon. So we rebuild, and the forest destroyed carcasses sink into springs thawing loam so they may feed the cycle of rebirth. In town, we hang wreaths, erecting tombstones over empty graves. Each time, life resumes, except for Will Taft. Losing his only son upended his world, and he became obsessed with the phenomenon which had claimed his boy. We've always regarded December black as another force of nature, as regular and immutable as tornadoes or flash floods. That wasn't enough for Will, though, and I watched from across the street as the former heavy-duty mechanic disappeared into books, coming back from trips to Chicago with milk crates full of them. Edie Campbell would bring him food, knowing if she didn't, this obsession meant he would likely starve. It was from her that I learned the details of what Will was up to, ultimately driving him to force a confrontation with the monsters from the forest. According to Edie, Will came to believe they were not actually from the forest or even this earth. No, he believed they came from the stars, traveling here via wormholes disguised as hexagonal clouds. It was the only reason they could treat us the same way they did the animals, he thought. They didn't understand we too were sentient. In retrospect, I have to imagine there was still some nascent paternal optimism hiding inside Will's soul in order for him to make this catastrophically wrong leap in logic. He recorded and studied the sounds they made, the cracks, the pops, the bee-like buzz, taking them to a linguist in the city who was able to identify patterns in the chaos. His revelation was that these were words in a language, and with enough time, it may be possible to translate them, even to speak back. Apparently, the man was no fool and agreed to keep Will's secret so long as he was allowed to be present at the moment of communication. I have to imagine he saw himself entering the history books as the first academic to speak with an extraterrestrial intelligence. I got to meet him that day before what we have come to call the event, and I liked him well enough, a tall, thin, bearded man with the unshakable confidence of someone who's mostly experienced the world from behind a desk. Still, he didn't deserve what happened to him that day. Neither did Will. Even though it's been a year, no one has touched his property. The shredded remains of the public address system Will hung in his trees are still jumbled together somewhere underneath the snow, the branches spiderwebbed with fraying speaker wire. It happened 2 days before the equinox, which makes it all the more tragic because if he'd been able to hold out a bit longer, they'd be gone. Will, though, he was a man on a mission. I woke up that morning to hammering. Looking out my window, I saw Will on a tall ladder, beating nails into the trees above his house, an exercise I'd later hear from Edie was the preparation for hanging speaker mounts. Below him, in a cleared patch of the yard, was the man I'd soon learn was the linguist, arranging expensive-looking computer equipment on a folding table. Once I'd had my coffee and showered, I'd shrugged on my insulated work jacket and stepped out into the frosty morning. I waited for Will to descend his ladder, then cross the street to say hi. He was so harried in his work that for the briefest of seconds he looked at me as if he had no idea who I was. A moment later, recognition dawned and he gave me a warm but brief greeting. Before he could walk away, I asked him what all the commotion was, and while I don't recollect exactly what he said, the gist of it was this. He and the linguist, who came over when he saw us talking, had been working together to understand the language of our visitors. Once they'd done that, the linguist was able to loop in a computer engineer friend to write a crude translation program. Together, they explained that the linguist would type in what Will wanted him to say, and the software would use edited versions of Will's recordings to communicate his words to the others via the hanging speakers. If they responded, microphones placed inside the forest next to his house would theoretically pick it up and relay it to the computer, which would then translate it into English. The linguist excitedly pointed out that their responses would be played aloud for all of us to hear. They were so excited about this whole process, pointing out how insane it sounded felt like a pointless enterprise. I smiled and nodded, then retreated to the safety of my house and its police locks. The dread arrived even before the sun dipped below the horizon, meaning they weren't far behind. I wondered if they had sensed something on the air, in anticipation perhaps. Despite my misgivings about what Will and the linguist were trying to do, once darkness fell, I permitted myself a single glance at them out my window. The men stood behind their table of computer equipment at the center of a halo of light cast by portable construction lamps. Wires trailed off into the trees above them. Everything was silent. Then Will began to speak, the linguist typing his words into the ramshackle workstation. I sat beneath the window, my back to the wall.
Are you here? Can you understand me?
The computer hummed for several moments after the final keystroke was entered. Silence followed, then a hiss from the speakers overhead. After that, I could hear the creature's noises booming out into the forest. Maybe this idea wasn't so crazy after all. A response came immediately.
We're here. We understand.
A flurry of words between Will and the jubilant linguist celebrating their success. Once they settled down, Will spoke again.
Where do you come from?
Again, the process of translation followed by a nearly instantaneous reply. Far away, the sea behind the stars. I mouthed the words to myself. The sea behind the stars, what could that possibly mean? Will?
Why do you come here from so far away?
The hisses, pops, and clicks echoed out in the silence. Food. Will hesitated a moment before speaking again.
Food? You come here to eat?
This time, they chose not to respond. When he asked his next question, Will's voice was higher, tighter.
The forest is full of animals. Why don't you just eat them? Why take us too? Why take my boy?
The question hung heavy in the air as the computer whirred. Your fear is sweet. The dread that had begun collecting alongside the shadows threatened to crush my chest. Will sputtered.
You can't eat us. We think, we feel. We're not wild game for you to hunt. My son wasn't some animal.
Even though the responses were generated by a computer, they came with a grim finality. You are food. Food does not feel. Seconds later, a chorus of knuckle pops and hisses washed in like the tide. Will's screams barely lasted a second. The linguist didn't even get that far. There was an electric pop and the light coming through the window above me winked out. There was a fury in the destruction that followed, something I hadn't thought the creatures capable of. For so long, I'd thought of them as mere animals. Looking back, I suppose it's only fitting they think of us as the same. The smell of copper began to filter in from outside. So heavy and rich, you could taste it.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.